Right now, as you're watching this, there's a reasonable chance your teeth are touching. Not chewing, not speaking, just lightly pressed together. Most people assume their upper and lower teeth rest against each other throughout the day. They don't, or at least they shouldn't. In a relaxed mouth, the teeth sit slightly apart, the lips are gently closed, and the tongue rests softly against the roof of the mouth. So if your teeth are in contact right now, your jaw may be doing something it was never designed to do continuously. And surprisingly often, the reason isn't found in the teeth themselves. It may involve stress, sleep, breathing, or other factors far beyond the mouth. We tend to imagine stress as something that lives only in the mind, a stream of anxious thoughts, a tightness in the chest, a night of broken sleep. But stress also has a physical address in the body, and for a remarkable number of people, one of those addresses is the jaw. Sometimes the body whispers before the mind notices. You've probably felt it yourself, a long, demanding day, and by the evening, there's a dull ache in the side of your face that you can't quite explain. Today's question, though, isn't whether stress and the jaw are connected. That would be too easy. The real question is more careful and far more interesting. Can your jaw actually reveal stress? And if it can, what is it really trying to tell us? Before we talk about stress, we have to be precise about what we're describing, because this is exactly the point where most conversations go wrong. The behavior we're discussing is called bruxism. In everyday language, people use that word to mean one thing: grinding your teeth at night. But the science is more nuanced than that single image. A 2018 international consensus published in the Journal of Oral Rehabilitation by a panel of the field's leading researchers redefined bruxism in a way that shapes everything that follows. They described it not as one nighttime habit, but as masticatory muscle activity, clenching, grinding, or bracing the jaw, and they separated it into two distinct phenomena. The first is sleep bruxism. It happens while you're asleep. It tends to be rhythmic, and it's tied to the way the brain and nervous system behave during the night. The second is awake bruxism. It happens during the day, and it looks different, more sustained clenching or quiet tooth contact, often while you concentrate, drive, scroll, or sit under pressure. Two behaviors, two contexts, most likely two different mechanisms. And here's the part that's easy to overlook. That same consensus concluded that in otherwise healthy people, bruxism should not be treated as a disease. It's better understood as a behavior, one that can be a risk factor for certain consequences, like worn enamel or jaw discomfort, but a behavior nonetheless. Behavior, not disease. Hold on to that distinction. It's going to matter enormously by the end of this episode. So, where does stress actually come in? This is where you'll hear a lot of confident claims. Stress makes you grind your teeth. It sounds obvious. It feels true. But the evidence is more measured than the headline. A 2025 systematic review published in the Journal of Dentistry gathered the available studies on bruxism, temporomandibular disorders, and psychological factors, stress, anxiety, and depression in adults. Its conclusion was deliberately careful. There does appear to be an association between bruxism and these psychological factors, stress, anxiety, and depression in adults. Its conclusion was deliberately careful. There does appear to be an association between bruxism and these psychological factors. People carrying more psychological strain do seem more likely to clench and grind. But the authors were just as clear about what the evidence does not establish. The precise mechanism, how stress and bruxism actually influence one another, is still not well understood. And association is not the same thing as causation. That's a distinction we return to again and again on this show, because it's where genuine rigor lives. The fact that two things appear together, Stress and a tense jaw does not prove that one directly produces the other. There may be shared pathways. There may be hidden factors driving both at once. The relationship may even run in more than one direction. What we can say prudently is this: psychological stress appears to be one of the factors associated with bruxism, particularly the awake kind, where clenching often rises and falls with moments of tension. But if there's an association, a fair question follows: could we ever measure it? This is where the story becomes genuinely fascinating, because if stress leaves a physical trace, perhaps we don't have to rely only on how someone says they feel. Perhaps we could measure it directly. This is where the story becomes genuinely fascinating, because if stress leaves a physical trace, perhaps we don't have to rely only on how someone says they feel. Perhaps we could measure it directly. And one of the most studied places to look is somewhere we've explored before on this show: saliva. When the body is under stress, it releases a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol doesn't stay locked inside the bloodstream. It appears in saliva, which means, in theory, we could read a signal of stress without a single needle. A 2015 study, published in the International Journal of Prosthodontics, set out to test exactly this idea. The researchers gathered a group of volunteers and used a small electromyographic device, a sensor that detects muscle activity, to confirm who genuinely was a bruxer, rather than relying only on what people reported about themselves. Then they measured two stress-related markers in the saliva, cortisol, and an enzyme called alpha amylase. They also assessed each person's perceived stress with a standardized questionnaire. The findings were striking. The people who clenched and ground their teeth reported higher levels of perceived stress. They also showed higher levels of salivary cortisol. There was a moderate correlation between how intense the bruxism was and how much cortisol appeared in the saliva. Sit with what that suggests for a moment, in this particular sample at least. A behavior in the mouth, clenching, moving in step with a chemical signature of stress that we can actually read. But here's where we stay honest. This was a small study. Correlation, once again, is not causation. And the two markers didn't behave the same way. Cortisol tracked with bruxism, while alpha amylase did not. So saliva doesn't yet give us a perfect stress test, not today, but it opens a genuinely remarkable possibility that the mouth could one day become a window into how the whole body is handling pressure. At this point, it would be tempting to tie everything up with a neat bow. Stress rises, cortisol rises, the jaw clenches. Clean, simple, satisfying. But the most rigorous voices in this field are telling us almost the opposite, that the story is becoming more complex, not less. In 2025, an international panel of bruxism experts met again and published an updated consensus. Once more in the Journal of Oral Rehabilitation. One of their most striking decisions was to step back from earlier definitions and openly acknowledge that the field is still refining what bruxism even is, and how it should be classified. That isn't a weakness. That's science being honest with itself. Because bruxism, especially during sleep, appears to be driven by far more than emotional stress alone. If you watched our previous episode on what happens to your mouth while you sleep, some of this may already sound familiar. Researchers point to microarousals during the night, brief moments when the brain shifts toward a lighter stage of sleep. They point to the autonomic nervous system, the part of us that runs quietly in the background. They point to the airway and to breathing during sleep. Genetics, certain medications, and other influences all seem to play their part too. So stress is part of the picture, but it is one thread in a much larger weave. And this really is the heart of it. The problem was never that we knew too little. The problem, for years, was that we simplified too much, taking something genuinely multifactorial and shrinking it down into a single tidy sentence. Understanding the complexity isn't a step backward. It's the entire point. So let's return to where we began. Can your jaw reveal stress? The honest answer is this. It may be one of the places where stress expresses itself, alongside many other influences. Your jaw is not a perfect stress meter, but it can be a messenger. A jaw that clenches, teeth that touch when they shouldn't, a dull tension across the muscles of the face by the end of a long day. These can be quiet signals, worth noticing, not signals to fear, signals to read. And that shift in framing matters. The goal was never to fight your jaw, to treat clenching as an enemy to be defeated. The goal is to ask what it might be trying to tell you about your sleep, your breathing, your nervous system, and yes, sometimes your stress. Because the mouth, as we keep discovering on this show, is rarely speaking only about the mouth. Pay attention. Your body already is.